All right. Okay. Well, so we have a lot to talk about. Interestingly, we have a couple stories out of Ukraine where one story is about a trans woman who is not allowed to leave because a trans woman is male and men aren't allowed to leave the country. I know you took the language, but I'm just trying to describe it. And the other story is a trans man who put on feminine clothing to be able to escape the country. So we'll get into all that stuff, and then obviously we'll get into this as well as happening in Ukraine. But we also have Lydia.
Here I'm Lydia.
What's up, everybody? Ian Crossan over here from IanCrossan.net. I'm actually working on my Brave browser right now and setting up my Brave search engine. If you haven't done that yet, flip over away from Google or DuckDuckGo and set up your Brave search engine.
I actually use that all the time. Right? Yes.
Do you use the browser and the search engine?
Yeah.
Good.
And I am also here in the corner pushing buttons. I'm wearing one of Kelly's shirts. I don't know if you guys can see it. It has the dictionary definition of the word woman, which is highly unpolitically correct. So I'm looking forward to learning that.
When did daylight savings time happen? Was that yesterday?
Sunday.
Yeah.
Sunday. I'm wondering if there's a lot of people in the chat who missed that.
I think it was last night.
No, it was yesterday.
It was yesterday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people
Like
think
ahead of time.
people think that it's 7 o'clock still.
Someone was like, "Why are they starting?"
We're so
And I'm like, "It looks like some people." Yeah.
This is the dawn of time.
yeah, it
All right.
was daylight savings. Yes, true.
I think it's so dumb. Just wake up an hour early, I guess. But whatever. It's brighter out. It's neat. All right. Before we get started, everybody, head over to simplyinternetsafe.com. You can pick up more information on your private network to upkeep your data safe. Right now, this is going to be obvious why we needed the January 6th committee. Just going to these phone companies and being like, give us the private records. Got it. This is why you want a VPN. Let a person that will help you keep your data safe. You'll get 50% off the lifetime discount at surfing. It's a virtual shield lets you browse the web anonymously. It's the big name ISPs that are service providers.
We're ahead of the enemy.
And sell using their VPN service to transfer traffic tool and through its security service. That means that any restrictions, censorship, and blocks of potential bypass. You can enjoy browsing a fast, reliable, and secure and always available network that is free for 30 days. Available on Mac, Windows, iPhone, iPad, Android, Chrome. Virtual Shield does all the work for you. Your entire connection becomes secure, private, and encrypted. Virtual Shield routes your internet through advanced encrypted servers across the globe to prevent your ISP from being able to track your internet traffic. Personal, family, and business plans are available. Family plan includes 15 devices. The business plan allows you to add as many employees as you need. Virtual Shield completely encrypts your Wi-Fi connection, blocking hackers and everyone else from accessing any of your data. So again, surfing internet safe. Special thanks to Virtual Shield for the support. They were our first sponsor going back, I think, now 6 or 7 years. So don't forget to go to timcast.com, become a member, and support our work directly. You'll be all of our journalists paying for this. Greatly for you. And also, you'll get access to members-only podcasts from this show. We're going to have a members-only version of the show up at 11 or so p.m. I imagine there's a lot of topics that are really sensitive that we're not going to talk about, but they're going to be. I think, let's put it mildly, tonight's members-only show might get very. It would piss off the sensitive. Check out TipCast.com. Now let's talk about this first story about Netflix. This one I find absolutely fascinating. Netflix takes on Texas. Attorneys analyze the outlandish fight over cuties. The Hollywood Reporter is basically they're talking about a story in which this month there was supposed to be a hearing in Texas. Netflix is was to face a criminal charge for I think it was like child abuse behavior or something. There was a federal ruling that overturned the statute from Texas about children and lewd activities or lewd behavior.
Just keep it up, and
So the
victory will
DA,
be ours.
who, strangely enough, the story goes, played the character Spider in Rock, brought the film Cuties to a grand jury and asked them if it depicted children in adult films, to put it mildly. And a grand jury returned 4 felony indictments. So now what's happening is we're seeing this Hollywood Reporter story. They're bringing in these lawyers who are like, oh, it's a First Amendment thing. You know, they're obviously critiquing the sexualization of children. And we're now in this strange world where when a DA brings the film before a bunch of regular people and says, was it crime committed? They say yes. yet the establishment media, the left as you would call it, is defending a film in which they took 4 young girls, who I don't care if you think they're actors or actresses or whatever, actually taught these little girls to do these dance moves, had them do it in an extended scene that was like 3 minutes long, have scenes where there's clearly adults grooming these children, and then said, but it's a dance movie. This is the you know, if I can broaden the conversation a little bit outside of this, clearly we live in completely different realities with whatever the establishment left us, from regular people to.
I'm kind of thinking of George Carlin's obscenity against obscenity. I understand. I'm, you know, morally, I felt like that movie was a little too sexualized. I think you made the example earlier. In order to explain something, you don't have to like show it necessarily. Like something really vile, you don't want to like put it in front of people to
Well, I
prove
mean, when
that you're doing
you
it.
know when Shakespeare plays all the violence happened off stage, you don't. I mean, those little girls doing it's just gross. What were the parents or anyone thinking?
Well, so I think there's one part of the story that usually proves they know they're doing something wrong. In the Hollywood Reporter, they say, conservative circles have rallied behind criticism of the movie for sexualizing and exploiting children. Babin's father, Texas Congressman Brian Babin, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, and a group of more than 30 House Republicans have called on the DOJ to prosecute Netflix. This and other calls by conservatives
In front of an audience of crew. They paid them for it. You know, they paid the children to do these things. There was a lot of incentive to do a good job,
The
you
reason-
know, and please the people who were asking them to do it.
I brought up Carlin because he, in order to show
there
the
was a lot of
obscene thing that he
incentive to
was
do a good
wanted to
job.
make
You
more
know, and
publicly
please the
agreeable,
people
he would
who
just do it.
were
He would
asking
say
them
it.
to
He would
do
say
it.
the words that were horrendous and at the time. And this is kind of like,
thing
so the metaphor is like the child sexuality is the dirty words of the 70s.
No.
It would be
Say the
different if it
words
was
that
an
were
animation.
horrendous and
It would be
at the time.
different
Like
if
Big
it
Mouth.
was.
So the metaphor
Yeah, I
is
which is
guess.
also
Yeah.
disgusting and weird.
It would be different if it was adults
It would be
playing children. If it was an animation, right?
There's a
I mean,
line you
that would be
can't
different.
Or
But
they
it's
could
not.
just like, the kids could have come out on the stage and then they could have showed people's faces
Yeah.
and then not actually put these little girls in that situation.
Carlin got arrested.
He wasn't
And he's an adult.
depicting the abuse of children, which is different. And even if you say things, like if he had said out loud what was being done, you know, what these girls were doing and being made to do, if you say it out loud, that's also different than actually doing it. So it's what makes it, I think, more similar to like a pornographic situation is that just like in adult films, the acts are actually performed.
What would be crazy is if it was about child murder and the movie was all about showing kids getting killed, if there wouldn't be any emotional backlash like there is about child sex. It's
Would
a
they,
big difference.
would the children actually be killed?
No, it would be all be acting, just like this is all acting.
No.
But it's
no.
not
You see-
acting once
right.
you're doing the actual thing.
Right, so like,
I mean, even if you're acting like you're doing the thing, you're actually still doing the thing.
It's
And
their
that,
real
you know,
bodies.
it's and it's like if that was a snuff film, if you're talking about a snuff film, there would be a lot of backlash of that.
well, I mean,
And this
I wouldn't call it backlash. I would say like pitchforks and
And it would
arrests
be,
and
you know,
DOJ
it would be illegal. It would definitely
Right.
be
I
illegal
guess-
to do like.
I get
I
to
think
see.
this-
Did you guys see Cubies? I haven't seen it.
You know,
I wouldn't watch it.
And some of the things.
Yeah.
It's
So,
like-
so the issue for me was I watched enough of it to where I said, yeah, I'll put that. I did not watch it. I see what you're saying.
We're ahead of the enemy.
But I watched the rest of the
Dude, they got a kid that looks like that. 12-year-old actor who's like sexualized Cortez.
Well,
Sure,
sure, but that's just like a friend.
what a weird thing.
Yeah, so Judy was the reason that I canceled. Sorry, I'm just not having it. I don't feel like giving money to a company that's
But was it a reality? I didn't see the movie. Was it a reality show? It wasn't. It was speculative. It was all.
Hey, I mean,
The movie wasn't. They didn't actually go into the club and get booked.
they had to
Hired out.
audition, and they probably had to sign a contract, and their parents had to agree to this grooming
But it was
behavior.
sexual. It was so they had to, whatever they were doing, acting or not, it was a sexualized performance. So it doesn't really matter whether they were acting; they were still actually doing it with real bodies.
So the funny thing is, the response from a lot of people on the left is that the final scene in question, where the little 11-year-old girls or whatever are doing sex dancing, that the audience is disgusted by it, and I'm like, but you all literally watched it too, and they actually had these little girls do that. So what? Show someone being grossed out by it, and all of a sudden you're allowed to do it? That doesn't make sense to me. If you're criticizing it, you wouldn't do it, right?
Also, when we have like TV shows or stuff like that in the US, usually adults do it. Like, I know everyone else. All those actors were in their 20s, and they were like having sex
Keep it up
and doing
and victory will be
whatever.
ours.
They had like all the makeouts and stuff, but everyone was in there.
What about Superbad? Marcus talked about Superbad. There's Christopher Mintz-Plasse, I think he's like 16 or something. And there's a scene where he's having apparently his parents had to be there and sign off on it. I'm wondering, this is a 16-year-old. We know high school kids. So I'm actually wondering.
I'm wondering. Yeah, if you're saying that, I'm wondering about that as well.
I still thought it was messed up.
Realistically, a 16-year-old boy and an 11-year-old girl are worlds apart when it comes to sexuality.
That's true
Well,
too.
right.
One is going, has gone through puberty and is still doing it. And the other
Still-
one,
Filming a 16-year-old boy.
that's certainly not. I would never sign off on that for my kid.
If I had been
He
that
was
16-year-old boy, I would have launched at battle.
Well, so,
Well, sure.
but so here's the
Would your
interesting
parents
thing.
have gone for it?
Yeah, they support my choices.
I honestly feel like this, along with what the whole Florida controversy over Don't Say Gay, it really does feel like right. It's not, but their perception of it, or what their critique is. You look at Superbad. There's a scene where a 16-year-old kid is hooking up. It's in the movie. It's not like graphic or anything, but it's clearly a scene acted out by this kid. And they want you to be like, they're 16-year-olds, you know high school kids do stuff. Then you end up with shows like Big Mouth, which is like, well, that show's cartoon though. Everyone's like, oh, but it's Big Bull. It's like famous actors pretending to be kids. It's just cartoons. And I'm like, it's still weird. You guys know the show Big Mouth?
I don't know it.
Gotta watch it.
Really?
It's worth it. It's the overly sexualized cartoon I've ever
Some
seen.
children. Yeah, I'm not.
Oh, God, I'm listening. I have to watch it.
It's like
gruesome.
you might get sick or something. And then he's got like a little deep sex demon on his shoulder that tells him no sex.
So,
They'd
well,
be like, I'm
larger than
overbearing. I'm taking over.
Netflix got criticized because of an episode where the show and they said, no, but how much girl can you give the body show? And people said, look, that's what happens. It's like Cuties, where it's like, now you have actual little girls doing it, but
Right.
oh come on, it's a critique, just like, and I'm just like, yo, why don't you guys like stop?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too because this stuff is coming up. This whole controversy with this whole gender queer by a person called Maya Huabe, I think. I don't know how to say the name, but this book has been talked about by parents all over the U.S. That this book has child pornography in it, and that it has like depictions of all these crazy things. So I bought the book because I'd been writing about it, and I was like, I should really take a look at this book myself. And it is rather disturbing, not just for the reasons that the moms that I know were complaining about it, but also for this journey of this young girl who comes to decide that she's not a girl at all, that she has like other pronouns that are like, they start with E's.
EM here.
Yeah, that's it. Here. And so the book eventually is the story of this person who grows up all very, couched in this language of hyper positivity. The main character in this book hates their body, is terrified of going to the gynecologist, which if you're a woman, like, you got to show up at the gynecologist at a certain point, at least a bunch of times in your life, to make sure that you're not dying from a whole bunch of reproductive issues that can kill you. So, this person is terrified of that, terrified of being touched, all of this stuff. And it's in the language of joy and spectacularness.
Look, I can, understand adults who want to live however they want to live. Someone's over 18 and they decide they want to, juggle oranges all day or like dress up like a giant duck. I'm gonna be like, literally don't care what you do. You go mind your own business. But it's the obsession with children that I find, disconcerting.
Me too. Yeah, like why do you need your middle school teacher to come out to you and tell you that they hate their body and
it's all over TikTok, right? That
all of this
people
stuff.
actually do come out to really small children in this fashion. But there is an overwhelming surge to break the frontier and boundaries of kids, just totally erode all safeguarding, not allow them to use words that are literal and mean something, and the sexualization of kids, whether it's cuties, whether it's this cartoon, but it's like it's as if you're doing something remarkable if you're trying to enforce this onto kids. It's so messed up.
It's almost like we've destroyed our culture to the point where there's no way for children to gauge when they're adults. So we just have to decide that they're adults from the very beginning and can understand this stuff. So kids are learning about gender identity before they know what sex is.
Why? I don't think it needs to be asked, but to the left, my question is to the left in general, why they think there's an age of consent. Now the issue is, I honestly think the left is opposed to that idea of an age of consent. I think many of these people are they're just ignoring that issue for now. But I think if you were to actually get these people in private and ask them, they'd probably advocate for really, really messed up stuff.
I think that's correct. And I think we've seen that, right?
I think what they're doing is they're eroding our culture with, things like cuties and defending it. And I'm like, could you imagine this film being made 15, 20 years ago?
Well, 15, 20 years ago, or 20 years ago anyway, like Tipper Gore would be pissed, right? And she was the second lady or whatever, the vice president's wife, who put the explicit advisory lyrics on, Mike Jane's Addiction album.
We see all those things on Twitter. Have you ever seen like MAPS, the minor attracted person stuff? And
or that's Foundation Prostasia, the Prostasia Foundation,
right,
which is all about advocating for pedophiles to be accepted in society.
You have to wonder about what these people's true goals are at the end, and then you have to wonder about why people like Epstein kind of just disappear. Why Ghislaine Maxwell gets convicted, but convicted of what? What did she do? I mean, we're talking about a crime that involves two people, right? Where are her clients? Why they all get away with it? And then it's really funny how it's just like anybody who brings that stuff up is clearly a conspiracy theorist, and they must be making things up. And I'm just like, dude, the Netflix thing is really, really fascinating, because I don't think they're going to be able to walk away from this one. A grand jury. So apparently the feds are like, we're gonna have a hearing on this in June or something, or July, over whether or not this stands. But I have a feeling that the DA is going to say to the federal judge, we completely agree with their critique. Yeah, and agree. You shouldn't sexualize kids. Okay, but they did.
It's such a shame, though, don't you think, with Netflix, because they really stood up for Dave Chappelle. They are willing to sort of allow supposedly controversial opinions, and I really was, I totally back them for that. I think that's brilliant. And then they do this, and you're like, oh, come on, please.
I don't know if they actually back Dave Chappelle to a certain extent. The last special that Dave did was heavily focused on trans people. It's really weird. Dave did a special. He mentioned, he had jokes about trans people. He got attacked heavily for it, and it seemed like it consumed him. And so he ends up, his next special ends up being this kind of like, it was very defensive.
It was nearly a TED Talk, to be fair.
Yeah, no, seriously. Where he was like, and he was like, I guess people just don't understand the jokes, so I'm going to stop doing them. Well, it's like they got him.
What did you think of that? What did you think of the whole Chappelle thing?
Well, I have issues anyway, because I think he's incredible for walking away from all that money and keeping his dignity and credibility all those years ago. But I'm not really a great big fan of his humour. The way that he talked about Candace Owens, I just can't really get past that. But yeah, I think it's bizarre that comedians, Ricky Gervais is the same, they sort of tell a joke and then explain the joke. And like, when have you started doing that? Just tell a joke. If it's funny, we'll laugh. And if it's not, we'll move on. But you saying, oh, this is good, wordplay and doing this, please don't cancel me. It's like, no, just have a great just tell a joke.
A story that is a great overlap is the story from Newsweek about J.K. Rowling and YouTuber Bosch sparring over that Tuesday. Mainly because one of the critiques against Bosch, one of the most common ones, is about his comments on children and sexualization of them.
Yes.
And so he is an interesting character in this, and that kind of embodies a lot of these things you're talking about.
Yeah.
So this story is, you may have seen it, it's actually from about 5 days ago. J.K. Rowling called Bosch likened him to an abusive ex-husband who used to tell me my life would be great if only I could comply
Engaging the
and the
enemy.
same mistake he did. Women like me can't be bullied out of existence. There's a couple of things I find interesting when we're talking about. One, I don't know if you saw that recently. What's her name? Emma Watson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she said, "I'm here for all the witches," and everyone like clapped. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but a lot of people are assuming she was making a trans affirming statement or something.
She looked up when she said it, so I think she was.
All the witches? Is that what she said?
She said,
Like all the witches.
like, what does that mean?
I'm here for all the ladies out there.
But J.K. Rowling's an interesting subject in this, and interestingly Bosch is as well, because we're talking about the weird grooming of children and stuff like that. Bosch is kind of criticizing that. J.K. Rowling, you know, it's an interesting story. For those that aren't familiar, I mean, this is the gist of the story. She said, "Someone please send the Shadow Minister for Equality's a dictionary and a background at the International Women's Day." And then Bosch said, "Women be quieter and start apologizing for challenge." To which she responded with that, you know, he's my husband. He said, "Listen, Joanne, you don't get to play the victim card. You're the advocate for taking away women's rights here. Trans women are raped and killed in men's facilities. You want to keep them there because of your trauma. Quit making your feelings under suppression." For this, you know, my attitude is like, and I said this before, is not to be cute or hyperbolic or facetious. I believe that Bosch is a men's rights activist.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, like saying women shut up, or you know, women be quiet, start apologizing. Like a language like that 10 years ago, they called it MRA, and even socialists would call it MRAs. So this is like this story and the issues around J.K. Rowling and what's going on. Man, I really just want to reiterate the point. There are two different realities. We know it. It includes war, it includes law, it includes politics, it includes culture. And this is where the two realities just clash all the time.
Well, it's sort of fascinating, right? Because we have set up an alternate reality as a social media in the online realm, which is an alternate reality. You guys remember Second Life, where you could like live in a virtual realm, and now you have Meta, which is like Second Life Part 2 or whatever, where you can live in a virtual realm. So as we are creating this alternative reality that we all engage in every day, you know, and if you're in media, you engage in it constantly, like always on Twitter or whatever. And then there's real life. And when you talk to people in real life, they know fully that men and women are different, and that biological sex is innate. And then when you talk to people online, they don't know that. So it's like this battle, which realm of reality is going to, which dimension is going to win the war of what's true. And what's interesting is when you have concepts of transgender ideology, which also is backed by concepts of transhumanism, which is the intentional evolution of humanity with the help of technology. And this you also find in Spawn, who's a transhumanist who years ago. Chance obviously was out there. We are graphic. certain times apparently at war with one another.
Take him down!
What is happening? It's a fascinating situation, and also
It's interesting movie, Bruce Willis. It's a future where people have these like pods they live, they plug in, consciousness transfer to a surrogate body, robot version of themselves. And so you see like Bruce Willis is being all like perfect it's like he can run super fast and it's a robot. Then he wakes up old and disheveled and wrinkled in his apartment. No one goes outside of him. It's like a surrogate. Instead, you open it, there's a guy and a woman come out of a club and they're hooking up. And then someone is able to kill them through their surrogate, so it's like a big deal. When the police go to the woman's apartment, they're like, ma'am, are you here? They find a 400-pound man, sitting in his chair, whatever, died. And so, I think that's an interesting concept that there's something when people are given the choice to project themselves what they look like they can on the internet as either a cartoon animal or identity-less, anonymous.
Right.
They just choose what they wish they were.
Right.
And I wonder if one thing that drives the aggressive people is living too much on the internet as opposed to living in your body. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think we don't live in our bodies as much as we used to, for sure. You can even tell with like so many of our trends are about trying to make your body okay. You know, you've been sitting for too long. Maybe you should exercise. You've been ordering in. Well, people have been bringing you food because you're breaking it.
But so I'm wondering if you look at the metaverse. I don't know if you've seen videos like Mark Zuckerberg.
They are
If we don't do
terrifying.
something fast,
But they look like
the enemy will win. Somebody attack him!
They don't, or like from the movies, but they don't look like humans. I'm wondering if people are identifying as that. And then,
Right.
because that's what you see as a person, that's who you interact with. I'm wondering if a lot of what we're seeing, because the identity crisis stuff isn't just trans,
It's sort of
other.
everybody. Yeah.
Are you familiar with other things killed?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
people
like
think
the
they're
funny.
they think they're dragons.
Or there's that
owls.
whole like refuge in Colorado, like, and they go
What?
there for like I'm not kidding.
That sounds horrifying.
Yeah, but yeah, I think we're
Hey,
having.
look,
I
but-
think all of this stuff. I think it's a transhumanist culture war. That's
Yes.
what we have
hopeful,
going on.
I'm hopeful. I think real human connection is actually a really powerful thing, and whilst we may trend away from it and people may shy away from it somewhat, I don't think we'll just I think that's I can't live in a world in which we are heading towards not touching each other.
But we're already there. Like
I know, and you mentioned
the
surrogates.
20-year-olds are having less sex or more like A for asexual is part of the LGBTQ alphabet soup, right? It's all in there. Asexual is a sexual identity. There's less sex, less people want to have kids. There's less touching. There's less
Do you
dating.
not think that we will get to a point though where this impersonal chaos will just repeat, and then we will just revert back to, maybe if there's a massive war.
Right?
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe if there's like a reason for all to run screaming towards.
But it has to do
There
with
have been so many.
the internet and video games.
Oh yeah.
If we keep living in digital spaces, then we're overcomers.
Could be that the species is splitting. I was watching a YouTube video happening last night. Obviously, branches of trees and remnants and come out of that. Like, they appear you'll have like the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens came together, but we were different. So like now we've got another race of like computer zealots that are like agenderless computer hominids. So like we've got everyone else is still Homo sapiens.
So you're saying the next stage of human evolution is bodiless conscious entities that exist in digital spaces?
Maybe, but the problem with that is all through history, when a species splits, they go to war with each other, and like one of the branches will end up becoming dominant. So like you might see that, and if they have like brain neural plants and they can move machines with their minds, that's going to be hard to do.
Well, why would you have that and stuff? Well, it's sort of, but imagine, it's not going to be, you're going to break it down towards more stuff.
And that is a transhumanist thing.
Right. And so what happens then when, people direct access to some ancient knowledge, for better or for worse, and then you're going and competing against somebody who doesn't. Like, in certain areas, they're going to end up being better than you in certain tasks.
There's also sort of I was talking to a friend of mine about this who has cerebral palsy, right? And so there's a lot of things.
We suffered a defeat.
And I was slamming
Head
all this
back to
stuff,
base.
Neuralink, and the idea that there would be these surrogates, because we had talked about that, like that you could go out as somebody else, and he was like, that all would be awesome for me, because I can't do shit, you know, like, and he was very like, if that were happening now, I would go move my random weird arm with my Neuralink that I can't.
Human body and put them in pods and then plug them into the matrix, their limitations would be defined mathematically by the code, not by their physical bodies, which is somewhat randomized. So you could be 6'5", 200 pounds of, 280 pounds of pure muscle in your pod. In the digital world, you are a weak.
I was thinking that last night. I
Identical
was
to
at
everybody
my
else.
computer and I
That's
blew my
interesting.
nose and threw the tissue away. I'm thinking like all this stuff I just did. I picked up the thing and I blew my nose and I took a sip and threw it. Like that was all in a computer. If I was in a computer simulation, I couldn't be able to do the variety of calculations that I can do in this reality. There's this like limitless potential of actions that you can take in base reality. And like exactly what you were just saying, in the metaverse, you're bound by the code. You can't go chop down the thing and take a sip of because it isn't real. It's just it's the illusion of the system.
I mean, depending on how complex the system is.
Yeah.
But when you're playing in video games online, your character